And hello, everybody. You're very welcome to a new episode of Redefining CyberSecurity. I am Sean Martin, your host for this podcast, where, as you know, if you listen to the show, I get to talk to all kinds of cool people about cool things to help organizations better secure the business so it can grow safely. And no question, the founding of ITSP Magazine with my co-founder, Marco, we dove straight in, this is 10 years ago now, straight into the human element and its connection between technology and society. And wrapped up in that is, wrapped around that, I guess maybe is a better way to say it, is security culture within an organization. And I'm thrilled to have Sarah Young on today from Microsoft. Sarah, good to have you on the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
This is going to be fun. We're going to talk about security awareness, Security 101 training for organizations. And you've done some work, as many of my episodes come to fruition. They're usually sparked by something I see on social media, typically LinkedIn. And this is no different. You put a post out about Security 101 for beginners, looking at explaining some foundational cybersecurity concepts, organizations to help their staff understand what's involved. And so that piqued my interest, and we're going to talk a bit about that. But before we do, a few words about what you're up to these days, Sarah.
Yes. So hello, everybody. My name's Sarah Young. I am a cloud security advocate at Microsoft. I live in Melbourne in Australia. So, but I'm very lucky. I get to travel all around the world as part of my job. But what is a security advocate? So we are part of, in Microsoft, you might be more familiar with the phrase developer relations or DevRel. So we do that, but for security specifically. And it's really cool because what we do is we go out and talk to security communities on behalf of Microsoft. I have been in the security community doing things like attending conferences and handing out swag and all those things for years before I actually started this job. But we also, and I think this is probably my favorite bit of the role, we go and advocate to Microsoft on behalf of our communities. So that can involve things like I lose my words this morning. It's very early here in Australia when we're recording this. That's why, if anyone's wondering why there's no video, it is very early and no one wants to see me at this time in the morning. But we do things like when we have Microsoft events or when we have feedback about products. That doesn't always, Microsoft's a huge organization. That doesn't always get back to where it is. So we also try and feed those things back in. We help curate our first-party events like Ignite and Build to try and, from a security perspective, give people the content that they're interested in. And this is what my other colleagues do in other areas of advocacy as well. But most of the time, most people will see me like up on stage doing something and giving a talk or a demo or doing a workshop. But that's actually only a teeny tiny part of what we do. It's just the most visible bit. But yeah, it's a really cool job, very, very busy as most people are. And yeah, that's kind of what I do in a nutshell.
Yeah, I love it. And of course, the visible bit is what people see. And I've seen some of the stuff you've done, and I'm grateful for the work that you do there. And then there's the deep down behind the scenes stuff, which I think we're going to spend some time on. So the resources here actually live on GitHub. And it's a bunch of documents and learning materials. So what it's called Security 101, and it's I'll include the link to the post on LinkedIn so people can access this, aka.ms Security 101-beginners. What was the catalyst behind putting that collection of resources together? Who's it for? What was the goal?
Yeah, so the Security 101 is something I put together because I felt, now there's I have to say from the word go, there is lots of security content out there and lots of it is great. So I don't want anyone, I'm definitely not denigrating anybody else's work. But what I found was that there wasn't that I could find any material that was just, hey, you interested in security? Well, let's talk about the really basic foundational concepts of security. And not in the sense, mostly when you find material like this, it's usually very tied to a particular exam or study path, like a CISSP or something similar. And actually, I do draw on some of the curriculum from those from those exams, but the whole point is that it's now 8 lessons because we just added one. It's 8 lessons.
I saw that. Yeah, my math. I'm like, I'm 1 off.
Yes. Yeah, it's okay. That only got added last week. So you didn't miss it or you didn't get it wrong. It was 7. And it's just some really basic concepts because I think that there is a lot of training material out there, but it's usually directed towards achieving a particular goal, like getting a job, achieving a certificate. Whereas I think there's a lot of folks out there that just want, or it's often tied to maybe learning a particular product of a vendor. And again, any vendor, there's a lot of stuff out there. And I don't, and a lot of it's also very complicated because when I was doing a bit of a survey about material out there, some of it's like very, very detailed and long-winded. And I think when you're a real beginner, it might be a bit much. So the idea was this was very, very, very foundational. I'm going to teach you in a relatively short period of time, just some concepts like the CIA triad, what is non-repudiation, some of those really, really core things before and let's talk about capabilities. So, what is security operations? What are the capabilities? So we talk about a SIEM. I know in the US it's more SIM, you say, but yes. We talk about that. But it's not like, let's talk about a particular product or a particular vendor, whether it's Microsoft or anybody else. Let's just talk about what that is as a concept and what it is as a tool and a capability. And because I think that there is a lot of, and the reason I think this is important, and there was a bit of a gap, was that there are now a lot of people out there who are being, I don't want to use the word forced, but let's face it, for some people, it is becoming a necessity that they're having to up their security knowledge. And a lot of employers will be like, here, go and do this course. And sometimes it'll be a vendor course. Sometimes it's more broad. But some folks are like, look, I just need to understand the absolute basics of this to get my head around it, because I just think that's been a gap. So that's why I put this together. It's just based on kind of me working in security for the last 12, 13 years. Some of it is sort of inspired by some of the foundational things that come out of some exams. I'm quite happy to say that's because these are just foundational concepts. But like I've taken a load of stuff out that I don't think you necessarily need right at the beginning, just to get your head around the concepts. Because what I found as well is that you'll find people who can talk about a product because they've been taught about a particular product or a problem, but they don't understand holistically the rest of the problem. So it's kind of designed for beginners, and that's like students or anyone in IT who's kind of, whether they've through choice or not, because let's face it, it's not always through choice, that they're having to get their head more around security things, but without that being tied to a specific product or a vendor or anything, because I do think there was a bit of a gap there. So that's kind of what I was doing.
Yep. Yeah, and I had the privilege, it's been a few weeks now, to sit on a workshop. It was a 3-day workshop with IC Squared. I hold a CISSP, so they constantly revamp the exam to be relevant and current and all that stuff. So I was able to contribute for 3 days, which was it was intense, but very rewarding and interesting to collaborate with others, looking at some of the topics, the way we speak about things. I got my CSSP, 15, 20 years ago now, so a lot has changed since then, and I try to keep up with it, and the exam is trying to do that as well. And so what I like about what you're describing is CISSP is pretty intense and pretty deep. This sounds like it's a great foundation from which one can take a different path if they're into networking, if they're into identity, if they're into protection, or you mentioned the SIM, so security response, whatever their passion might be, they can jump from this. So you mentioned students and IT folks who want to get their beak wet in security. I don't know, can you maybe run through some of the modules? There are 8 now. Nobody will be surprised what number 8 is.
Oh, I know. So
walk through that for us.
Yeah, so the modules are, we'll leave everyone on tenterhooks for number 8, although I'm sure people can guess. So the first module is about those, I just call it the basic security concepts. So that's the CIA triad. So confidentiality, availability, and integrity. These are words that we throw around a lot. And what I find as well is that people who have only learned about security, possibly not less formally, and have just like listened to things in the media, everyone knows about confidentiality, but they don't realize that availability and integrity often don't realize that is also part of security. And that's why we care about all 3 of those things, and arguably equally. But I think most people think just confidentiality, of course, because we talk a lot about data breaches, etc. So we also talk about some common cybersecurity threats. Again, we're just talking about those basic concepts of what kind of attacks are, what's out there. And then this is probably the one that I'll talk about some of the other ones, but ones I want to highlight is risk management. Now, I know a lot of people go, oh, risk, and then they roll their eyes because they're like, oh, risk is boring.
Unless you're like me, who geeks out on it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's some people who geek out on it, but I think a lot of security folks just go, oh, risk, whatever. That's really boring. But the thing that is most important in there is like what they call the circle of risk, which is using a lot of terms properly. So it's threats are materialized by attacks that exploit vulnerabilities in a system, that expose you to risks, that are mitigated by countermeasures, that protect assets, that can be compromised by threats. And it goes round and round and round. But what we find, and I find this with plenty of security professionals, myself included, that we don't use the word threat, attack, vulnerabilities, risks. We sometimes use some of those things interchangeably. We don't use them technically correctly. And I think I don't expect that to change anytime soon in the future. I think we'll still probably have, people not using them correctly. But I do think it's important that people understand that there is specific language and they do mean something specific, because that is kind of how we do security all the time. We also talk about, of course, more high level, the other lessons in there are identity and access management. What is that? What's the principle of least privilege, etc. We talk about network security fundamentals. I mean, I was a network engineer before I did security. I mean, I was like, oh, this is a lot to go through in a very short period of time, because, of course, networking is a big thing in itself. But we sort of just talk about some networking concepts if you've never worked on it before. I'd like to think at least IT people probably have done a bit of networking, because of course it's not new. We talk about security operations fundamentals, application security fundamentals. So, we're talking about application security tooling, OWASP top 10, etc. Infrastructure security, data security, which I think is one that is getting more and more prevalent at the moment. I mean, data security is not a new thing, but use it with the advent of AI, data security, breaching data has become much easier with AI. So now people are caring about it a lot more than they used to. It's interesting because I hear this all the time, what about my data with AI? What's the AI doing with my data, et cetera, et cetera? Are you training your model on my data? And they're like very, very legitimate concerns to have. But in fact, data security, all our AI is doing, this isn't a new problem. This is a small tangent that I will not go on because we'll be here all day. But data security isn't a new problem. In fact, most organizations, to be honest, haven't done data security well for a long time. But AI is just really is much better and quicker at finding things you haven't protected well in your estate. And that's why it's putting a spotlight on it. So that's just a random little tidbit off data security. And then the lesson that we added very recently, because I probably should have added it when I made this a few months ago, is AI security. Because of course it's AI, everyone's talking about AI, and it was probably an oversight on my part to not add it originally. So we threw that in just last week, actually, and so we talk a little bit about why that's a problem, and a challenge for and what the main problems are in the AI space, and what responsible AI is as well, because responsible AI is a new concept, a new idea, and you can't really extricate it from security. They're massively entangled with each other. So again, it's just sort of priming people for understanding those concepts and the main things we'll talk about. It's not going into this is how you fix everything. There's lots of other material out there for that. It's more of that, just getting your head around some concepts and ideas if you are like a complete beginner and you need to go from scratch.
Yep. Yeah. So AI, of course. Now I was just looking at that the first module in there, and you kind of touch on some of the other modules. So I presume you had to have the other ones in place before you could obviously tie AI back to those. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. I mean, AI security, security is a holistic thing, and none of these security, although I have separated them out, the reality is these different modules, none of this, that's just for people to get their heads around it. The reality is that none of these things exist in isolation, or shouldn't do, because there is no such thing as one security control to rule them all. It's you have to have multiple layers. That's defense in depth. So it is separated out, but you're right. I mean, all of these things link together. And AI, in fact, AI security in particular, it's actually not, at least, the field is changing very quickly, so I'll caveat this. But at least at the moment, we're still, our main security controls for AI security are mostly things we've been doing for years and years. We're still leaning back on our, AI security. AI is essentially, when we talk about AI, we're still talking about an application. It's just an application that hasn't, that is using AI. So really, we should be looking at it from an application security perspective with a couple of extra bits, so we should still be looking at, how do we build this? Are we coding it in a secure way? Are we are we connecting, or is the application connecting, if it's talking to a database, if it's talking to a data store, are we doing that securely? And are we doing that in a good practice way? Are we restricting the people who can access it? None of this stuff is new. And I think that's probably one of my, obviously, because it's the thing that everyone's talking about, or has been for a while now, is that I really wanted to impress on people that AI security is not, there's less new stuff than you realize. It's not a brand new problem, and there's not brand new security controls. Lots of it is still using the security controls that we have known and loved, with a few extra bits on the side, a couple of things that are different.
Yeah, absolutely. So have you received any feedback from folks who've used this? I mean,
yes.
Go for it.
Yes. I mean, do you know what? I was extremely excited, because the great thing about GitHub, of course, is you get to see, how many people have looked at it, how many people have forked it, and people who've watched it and favorited it. In fact, I do love the statistics you get out of GitHub repos for things like that. And I was pretty shocked, actually, because I just felt it was a gap. I don't know, it got, I mean, it's only been out at the time we're recording this, just under 2 months.
Right.
And we've already got 304 people have forked it. We've got 3,200 odd people who've started, favorited it. So, it seems pretty good. And so I really like that, of course. It seems like it is something that people want and need, something that's fairly agnostic. I mean, I know I work for Microsoft, and you can find this on the Microsoft GitHub repo, but it is actually deliberately very agnostic. It's not talking, I'm not trying to sell you Defender or anything like that, because there's, like I said, it's kind of before that. It's understanding conceptually what the problems are and what the kind of tooling is. Like if you go off and buy something else or go and learn more about a particular tool and decide it's for you, that's fine. This is not kind of a secret. Go buy all the Microsoft things, because I think that if just understanding security problems from a product perspective, whether that's Microsoft or something else, isn't the way to go if you're trying to understand holistically more what the security problems are. And I think just because of the way of the world, a lot of security training that's not something like a CISSP, and as you said, that's very intense, right? It's huge. I've done it too. It's it's a huge body of knowledge, and there's so many people now who are being asked to take on security as part of their role. They may not be a security, their job may not be dedicated security, but they are being asked to take on some security. And I think it is unrealistic to expect that someone who maybe a sysadmin or a developer, you're like, go and do your CISSP. That's not realistic. Right. So it's kind of how can we upskill your security knowledge a bit with these concepts, so you understand, also so you can understand where a security person, say you're talking to your security architecture team or whatever team you have, so you can understand where they're coming from. Because a lot of the time, the conflicts or sometimes the friction that is that you see between security and other parts of IT and the wider part of the business is more that it's more that people are not just speaking each other's languages. It's not that they don't understand. It's just that many other parts of IT, they haven't had the knowledge and they don't look at it from the same perspective. Usually everyone's trying to get to the same place, but they don't speak the same language. They don't have the same perspective. For example, this is the example I always give. Years ago, before I worked for Microsoft, I was working as a kind of I was working as kind of like an external contractor for a large organization here in Australia. And I was working with a load of devs, and they were putting things in the cloud, and it was relatively new what they were doing. And they had what I would call quite an old school security team. So most of them had been there a very long time. They were all sort of fit a certain demographic, and they really enjoyed saying no to things that were new because they didn't really understand it. And I was speaking, and my job was to help the developers because the developers had to bring them a couple of pages on what they were going to migrate. They were basically breaking up old applications, turning them into microservices and putting them in the cloud. But the security architecture team had to review what they were doing. And one of the devs brought me his the template that we had. It was a couple of pages long, and they had to basically draw out the system, and they had to put all the different how the different elements of this microservice were talking to each other, and the protocols, et cetera. And some of these things were very old, and they were essentially, for want of a better phrase, shoehorning them into the cloud. And some of these things were really old and didn't really like it. And they were so old, they didn't support anything like TLS. They had to talk in Telnet, which is just, I weep, but these things happen in real life. Right. And one of the developers had brought it to me, and he'd put, because obviously Telnet was contrary to security standards, but he'd put in the kind of justification, we can use Telnet because it is safe. And I was like, you what? And I was like, talk. I was like, you can't. I was like, what? And he said, well, it's safe because, I mean, that's all he'd written, because it is safe. And I was like, please tell me you don't think Telnet is safe. And he was like, oh no, I know it's not safe. And I was like, but why have you written that in the thing? The security architecture team will go nuts like when they read that. And he said, well, it's safe because it's not being exposed to the internet. It was actually it's not, it's all internal within this, within this network group, within the cloud. It's not going to be exposed externally. So, it's safe. And I was like, okay, I totally understand what you mean, but this is not what you have written here. And this is not how security will interpret what you have written. So I explained to him, I said, what we would say here in security is we would say, we get, you'd say something along the lines of, we get Telnet's not great, but it's the only thing this application supports. There is no way to upgrade it because it was so old. I mean, I'm actually surprised we could get it into the cloud, but there you go. But we could, they could. That's another story. And but it is low risk because although Telnet's not great, and we know that, we can't do anything else because it just doesn't support it. And it's low risk because we're not exposing it to the internet, and there are all these other like compensating controls that mean it's not going to be exposed to the internet. And so he went away and he sort of rephrased everything, came back, and I was like, love it. This looks great, because what you're showing here is that, and they did understand. It's not that they thought Telnet was safe. It's just they didn't have the language. They weren't looking at it from a security person's perspective, because why would they? They're devs. That's not what they've been trained to do. And I said, but when you have that conversation with folks and you explain to them, like, hey, it's like, don't say it's safe, because let's say they said it's not safe. But if you say it's low risk, and this is why it's low risk, and you can show that you've actually thought about it, you're not going to give your security architecture people who are reviewing this a complete heart attack. Right. And then because for a lot of security people, I think we're getting better as an industry, but they would see something like that and they wouldn't question it and say, hey, what are you actually trying to say here? Are you sure? Do you really think Telnet is safe? They'd have probably just been gone, oh my goodness, what the heck are these people thinking about? That's a no. Like, go away. We're not allowing this. Your request to do this is denied. And I think that's a shame that, and you know what? After I sort of had a chat with the devs and they brought a few of these things to me, because they were bringing them to me, these were very small microservices. I was looking at them regularly, like 4 or 5 of them a week. After a couple of weeks, they'd still send them to me. And I'd be like, yeah, this looks fine. This looks good. You've got the hang of this. Like, you get it. And it wasn't that they didn't get it. It's just they didn't know how to write it in a way or express themselves in a way that made sense, that gave the security folks confidence that they actually had thought about what they were doing, because they actually had. It's just they didn't know how to put it down in a piece of paper for review. And I always talk about that example, and it always sticks in my mind because, I think a lot of the time, and we're IT folks, a lot of us, I wouldn't say EQ and communication is necessarily our strong point. And I think there's sometimes just a lot of being that collaboration and communication and being curious rather than going, oh my goodness, what is this idiot doing? Just no. The answer is no, like red stamp it. I think that that's something that we all need to get better at. I think so. My idea was for non-security folks who work in IT or in other parts of organizations, because let's face it, everybody interacts with IT nowadays, that this could help give them some tools around thinking and understanding the language that we use and how security comes at it. But I would say that I am not saying that we as security folks don't have work to do there as well. Right. And that being a little bit more forgiving, being more curious, and asking questions rather than just jumping to conclusions about what other parts of the business are doing, because I personally believe that, we'll get on my soapbox a bit here, security is not that hard. High level security concepts, like, of course, there are some niche bits of security. If you want to be a security researcher, if you want to be a penetration tester, a red teamer, of course, that requires some very specific skill sets. But to understand security concepts at a high level, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to get to, is actually very straightforward. And I think, unfortunately, we as security folks, for a long time, have for want of a better phrase, been gatekeepy around security, and been like, to the rest of IT and the rest of the business, this is security. It's very difficult. It's very complicated.
You wouldn't understand it.
You wouldn't understand it. And I hate that, because it's not true. Security is an awful lot of common sense. And I think that if you are explaining security to someone and they don't understand it, you're probably too in depth. You're probably trying to go too in depth, or you might just not be very good at explaining things. Because I genuinely believe that, and because I spend a lot of time doing this, and even in my spare time, I'll love a chat about security with people. I think, like, even to the everyday public, you can explain security. I just think we have been, as an industry, quite gatekeepy, being like, well, this is very, security, it's very difficult. And I detest that, because we have a shortage of security professionals in the world, all over the world, no matter where you are. And by bringing some people up to speed with some key security things, whether or not they want to go into security as a career, is not going to affect your career prospects. It's really not. Yeah. But I still think there's some reticence, at least for some folks, to try and kind of fix that a bit and bridge that gap. And it's beneficial for everybody. If we all do security better, it doesn't mean that folks, we who work in security as specialists, are going to lose our jobs, because there's a massive gap in how many folks we have anyway. But by bringing more people up to speed, then we are just, we're uplifting security posture more generally, because people who are trying to do breaches generally they don't go for security users generally, right? They're probably going to go for somebody else, because that makes more sense. So it benefits all of us to help people understand, even if it's just at a very high level, those basic security concepts and what we're trying to do, because it's a lot of common sense. It really is.
It is. And I'm going to go back to a point you made on the conversation, because the goal for the business is to get from A to Z, right? And do it again, repeatedly and more efficiently and effectively to grow revenue and make everybody happy. If security is there stopping at B because the devs presented at step A with limited knowledge of what security is going to do at step B, that's not very effective. So I think the better you can communicate, the more likely you'll move beyond step B and C and on through to Z. The other thing is, as you're moving through A to Z, you kind of, I think you spoke in the words of somebody who said, well, what are they thinking here? This is really stupid. It's not safe, right? The lack of trust gets set as well if you're not communicating on this. And this, to your point, goes both directions. So I think a common understanding that can be leveraged to move from A to B to Z, I think, is super powerful. And I can see many cases where this repository that you put together, I don't know if that's the right word for it, but this collection of resources with exams at the end of each thing. I can see people sitting down lunchtime and going through a module, and then at the end of the week taking the exam together. And this could be folks in IT, it could be folks in legal, it could be folks in procurement, looking at third-party stuff. Up and down the organization, I can see value in having them at least have an understanding of the bare necessities of cybersecurity, if you will.
Yeah, that was basically the idea, because, like I said, it never hurts anybody to understand this stuff nowadays, because, like it or not, we all and I know that some folks don't, but the fact is we all have to help out with security, team sport and all of that. But So if we can help, and this is something I think, it's a two-way thing as well. I think a lot of folks are curious about security now as well. I just think that there's just not, the problem is a lot of training is too in-depth, or product specific, and it doesn't really lend itself to maybe sort of a casual browse, or someone who's like really, really starting out, and then they can go on to something else that's a bit more in depth. Because I mean, when I did this, I was super worried, because I was like, is this too basic? I was like, this is, and of course, to me, who's worked in security a long time, of course, it's very foundational. But like I said, it seems to have been received really well. So I am very happy about that.
Yeah, well, it goes beyond. I mean, the super basic is don't click on crap, which true. Doesn't do much. This actually provides some value. I think, obviously training in the other way does too. But I mean, this kind of lays it out there. How hopefully people can see this. Our business runs this way because we use technology, and these practices in security help us do that safely. And I think with the work you've done here, people can make that connection, and I think that's super valuable. So, Sarah, thank you for putting that together, and be curious to know where all those forks are landing, who's updating it for what reason. But if there are any stories, if anybody listening has used the resource, I'd love to hear. Maybe throw a comment in the post chat there. And I think
I would. Yes, because it is completely open sourced, and people are welcome to do whatever they want with it. So if I would like to know if anyone's doing cool things with it, because that's really awesome.
Yeah, so please do. If you haven't heard of it, seen it, go check it out. If you have and you're playing with it, let us know. And if there's some cool story or program built around this thing, maybe another chat is in order. But for today, Sarah, I want to thank you for having an early start to your day to join me, and for being flexible. I know we had some challenges in getting my schedule sorted, so thanks for being flexible for that. And to everybody listening, take a look for the link for this, and please do subscribe, share, follow Sarah as she does this and many other things for the community at large. And Sarah, thanks again for joining, and we'll see everybody on the next episode.